Leave it to the women to handle the paperwork while the real soldiers work. Captain Davies let the words hang in the dry, dust-choked air of the briefing tent, a smirk playing on his lips as he surveyed his audience. The crowd, a company of infantrymen readying for a multi-day patrol, chuckled. It was the easy, complicit laughter of subordinates eager to please a commander who confirmed their own biases. They were lions, and he was the alpha, and this was the natural order of things. Sergeant Elena Morgan, standing by the comms panel and running a final diagnostic, did not flinch. She did not look up. Her focus remained entirely on the green glow of the screen, her fingers moving with a liquid economy across the keypad. Her posture was a study in stillness, a single, solid point of calm in the swirling dust devils of masculine bravado that filled the tent. To Davies, her silence was confirmation of her station, the quiet deference of someone who knew her place was behind a desk, not behind a rifle. He saw her slight frame, her hair pulled back in a tight, regulation bun, the absence of grime and sweat on her brow, and saw weakness. He saw a box ticker, a diversity hire, a symbol of the military he felt was losing its edge. He couldn't have been more wrong. But when General Madsen, the visiting two-star who stood in the corner of the tent, a silent observer with eyes that missed nothing, saw her stance, he saw something else entirely. He didn't see a clerk. He saw a predator at rest. He saw the subtle, almost imperceptible way her weight was balanced on the balls of her feet, the way her eyes scanned the tent's entrance every few seconds without moving her head, the coiled energy in her stillness. It was the posture of a hunter, someone who had spent a lifetime waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Madsen had seen that stance before, in places that didn't appear on maps, in men whose names were permanently redacted from official records. He saw a professional hiding in plain sight. If you believe that true strength is measured not in words spoken, but in deeds accomplished, type competence below. The condescension from Captain Davies was not a single, isolated burst of arrogance. It was a sustained barrage, a campaign of dismissiveness he waged with the casual cruelty of a man utterly convinced of his own superiority. As his men filed out of the tent, checking their gear and slapping each other on the back, he walked over to the comm station, ostensibly to get a final status report, but truly to land another volley. "Sergeant," he began, not using her name, his tone dripping with false magnanimity. "I trust you and your team." He gestured vaguely towards the two other female soldiers in the tent, both junior specialists. "Can handle the fort while we're gone. Just keep the coffee hot and don't touch anything important. The real work, the kinetic stuff, is best left to us." Morgan finished her final check, the system blinking a steady, healthy green. Only then did she look up, her gaze meeting his for the first time. Her eyes were a flat, neutral gray, betraying nothing. No anger, no fear, no resentment, just an assessment. It was unnerving. "The network is fully operational, sir. All channels are secure," she said, her voice even and low, a stark contrast to his booming tenor. Her response was so devoid of emotion, so purely technical, that it seemed to disarm him for a moment. He had expected a reaction, a protest, a flicker of indignation, something he could seize upon to further his point. Her calm was a mirror he didn't want to look into. He grunted, recovering his bluster. "Good. See that it stays that way." He turned to leave, then paused, adding a final, parting shot for the benefit of the last few soldiers lingering nearby. "Just remember, Sergeant, your most important weapon system is the telephone. Don't let it jam." The laughter followed him out into the glaring sun. Morgan watched him go, her expression unchanged. She then turned to her specialists, whose faces were a mixture of frustration and embarrassment. "PFC Riley, run a Level 2 diagnostic on the satellite uplink. Specialist Grant, cross-check the encryption keys with the new daily codes. Let's get ahead of any potential issues." She didn't acknowledge the insult. She didn't offer words of consolation. She simply gave them a task, a purpose. She taught them, through her own example, that the only worthy response to ignorant noise was the quiet hum of flawless execution. Meanwhile, General Madsen observed from the shadows of the command post. He watched Davies lead his company out through the main gate of FOB Nightingale, a column of confident men marching into the desolate, rock-strewn valleys that surrounded them. The general felt a familiar knot of unease tighten in his gut. Arrogance was a liability in this part of the world. It made you predictable. It made you blind. And Davies was broadcasting his intentions, his contempt, his underestimation of the environment to anyone who might be watching. And someone was always watching. The base, now operating on a skeleton crew, felt strangely hollow, the usual thrum of activity replaced by a watchful quiet. Morgan and her team continued their work, their movements creating a small island of focused industry in the vast, vulnerable silence. She moved from her station to a small, personal locker, retrieving a long, heavy-duty Pelican case. She opened it not with a clatter, but with the practiced, reverent care of a concert violinist unlatching an instrument. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, lay an M210 enhanced sniper rifle. It was not standard issue for a comm sergeant. It was the tool of a master artisan. Her hands, which had been so deft on the keyboard, now moved over the cold steel of the rifle with an even deeper familiarity. She began to clean it, a methodical, rhythmic ritual that was its own form of meditation. The scent of solvent and gun oil filled her small corner of the tent, a silent, professional rebuke to the captain's parting words. Her most important weapon system was not the telephone. Her most important weapon system was an extension of her own will, a tool capable of delivering a final, undeniable message across a mile of hostile air. The silence of the base was about to be broken, and the assumptions of men like Captain Davies were about to be shattered with the force of a high-velocity round. The first mortar round landed without warning, a deafening concussion that ripped through the midday lethargy of the base. It wasn't a lucky shot. It was a ranging shot. The second and third followed in rapid succession, a brutal, percussive drumbeat that announced the beginning of a symphony of violence. An alarm klaxoned, its desperate shriek almost lost in the rising cacophony of explosions and automatic weapons fire. FOB Nightingale, stripped of its primary fighting force, was under a full-scale, coordinated assault. From the low ridges and hidden wadis that encircled the perimeter, hundreds of enemy fighters emerged, a wave of determined hatred flowing down the slopes. They weren't disorganized militia. They moved with discipline, laying down overlapping fields of fire, their heavy machine guns tearing into the flimsy HESCO barriers. The skeleton crew, a mix of support staff and rear echelon personnel, scrambled for cover, their response a chaotic mix of bravery and terror. The few guard towers on the perimeter were suppressed immediately, their machine gunners pinned down by accurate, overwhelming fire. Panic began to cascade through the comms network, a flood of desperate calls and broken sentences. Tower 3 is hit. We're taking heavy fire from the east ridge. They're breaching the south wire. We need reinforcements. Where the hell is Davies' company? In the comms tent, now shaking from the impact of nearby explosions, Specialists Riley and Grant were white-faced, huddled beneath their consoles. But Sergeant Morgan was no longer there. While the world descended into chaos, she moved through it with an otherworldly calm, a phantom of purpose. She didn't run. Her movements were swift but deliberate, a calculated flow of energy that wasted no motion. She grabbed her rifle case and a go bag, its contents meticulously prepared for just this moment. Her destination was the one place on the base that offered a commanding view of the entire battlefield. A half-constructed observation tower on the northern perimeter, a skeleton of steel and concrete that the engineers hadn't had time to finish. It was exposed, a dangerous and obvious perch. But Morgan didn't see danger. She saw opportunity. She saw fields of fire. Reaching the base of the tower, she began to climb, the rifle case slung over her back. The air was thick with the metallic taste of cordite and the screams of the wounded. Bullets whizzed past her, pinging off the steel beams, but her focus was absolute. She was ascending into her element, leaving the chaos of the ground below to enter the cold, clear, mathematical world of the long-range marksman. At the top, a bare concrete platform offered 360-degree views. She laid down a worn shooting mat, its fabric stained with the earth of a dozen different countries. She assembled the M210, her hands a blur of practiced efficiency. The heavy barrel clicked into the receiver, the suppressor was screwed on with a quiet twist, the optic was mounted and checked. She chambered around, the sound of the bolt sliding home a small, sharp promise of what was to come. She laid down behind the rifle, becoming one with the machine. Through the high-powered scope, the battlefield was not a terrifying swirl of violence. It was a series of problems to be solved. She saw not a horde of attackers, but a collection of targets, each with a specific value. She saw the enemy's command and control elements, the men with radios directing the assault. She saw the heavy weapon teams, the mortars and machine guns that were chewing up the base's defenses. She saw the grenadiers preparing to launch RPGs at the command post. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropped. The thunder of the battle faded into a distant hum. There was only the rifle, the crosshairs, and the target. She exhaled, her finger taking up the slack on the trigger. The first shot was not a sound, but a void. The suppressor turned the supersonic crack into a dull, heavy cough, a sound that was swallowed by the larger din of the battle. Across the valley, 1,000 yards away, an enemy commander who was directing fire with a radio suddenly collapsed, a neat, dark hole appearing in the center of his chest. His subordinates stared in confusion, looking for the source of the shot, but there was none to be seen. A ghost had just entered the battle. The effect was not immediate, but insidious. It was a poison seeping into the enemy's morale, one precisely delivered dose at a time. The second shot, taken seconds after the first, eliminated the operator of a DSHK heavy machine gun that had been pinning down the defenders in the main aid station. The gun fell silent. The stream of tracers that had been pouring into the building ceased. In the sudden quiet, the medics were able to pull 2 wounded soldiers to safety. They had no idea why the gun had stopped. They just knew they had been given a reprieve, a breath of life from an unseen guardian. From her perch, Sergeant Morgan operated with the detached precision of a surgeon. Her mind was a complex calculator, instantly processing windage, elevation, target lead, and bullet drop. She worked her way through the enemy's hierarchy of threats with ruthless efficiency. The 2-man mortar team that had been methodically walking their rounds towards the command post was next. 2 shots, 2 seconds apart. Both targets fell without ever knowing they were being watched. The mortar went silent. The defenders on the ground, fighting for their lives in a desperate, close-quarters battle, began to notice a change. The rhythm of the attack was faltering. The overwhelming pressure that had been on the verge of collapsing their defenses was starting to ease, not everywhere at once, but in key sectors. An RPG team setting up to fire on the fuel depot was neutralized. A sniper hiding in a rocky outcrop, who had already claimed 2 American lives, was eliminated with a single, masterful shot that struck him directly through his own optic. The enemy's confidence began to fracture. Their numerical superiority meant nothing when their key assets were being decapitated by an invisible, impossibly accurate force. Panic, a far more potent weapon than any bullet, began to spread through their ranks. Their radio channels, once filled with coordinated commands, devolved into a cacophony of fear. They screamed about a genie, a spirit in the mountain, a ghost that killed from the sky. They fired wildly into the hills, wasting ammunition on shadows, seeing threats in every rock and crevice, everywhere except the one place the threat actually was. Morgan was a phantom. She never fired twice from the exact same position on the platform, shifting a few feet after every couple of shots, making it impossible to pinpoint her location. The sun was at her back, putting her in shadow and creating a blinding glare for anyone looking up from the valley floor. She was using the environment, the chaos, and the enemy's own fear as her camouflage. The battle became a one-woman show. She was not just killing. She was dismantling the enemy's ability to fight. She was a conductor of silence, and her instrument was the M210. With each suppressed shot, she created a pocket of quiet where a threat used to be. A silent machine gun, a silent mortar, a silent commander. These silences accumulated, stacking on top of one another until they became a deafening roar of failure in the minds of the attackers. The momentum of their assault didn't just stop, it shattered and reversed. What had been a disciplined advance devolved into a disorganized rout. Fighters who had charged up the slopes with zealous fury were now scrambling back down, trampling their own wounded, desperate to escape the haunted ground where death came silently and without warning. From the command post, General Madsen watched the drone feed on the one remaining monitor, his face a mask of awe. He saw the enemy formation crumble, the attack breaking apart for no apparent reason. But he knew the reason. He toggled the drone's camera, zooming in on the half-finished tower. There, barely visible, was the prone form of a single soldier. He couldn't make out who it was, but he knew. He knew that one quiet professional had just done the work of an entire company, proving that the character of the warrior is infinitely more important than the size of the army. The last, panicked shots from the retreating enemy faded into the vast indifference of the mountains, leaving behind an eerie, ringing silence. The air, so recently filled with the thunder of combat, was now heavy with the aftermath. The smell of burnt propellant, the distant moans of the wounded, and the unsettling quiet of the dead. The defenders of FOB Nightingale slowly emerged from their fighting positions, their faces blackened with grime, their eyes wide with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. They had been on the brink of being overrun, outnumbered, and outgunned. And then it had just stopped. The pressure had vanished. They looked at each other, questions hanging unspoken in the air. Who had saved them? Where had the help come from? General Madsen was the first to move with purpose. He keyed his radio, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through the day's chatter. All station, this is Madsen. Ceasefire. I say again, ceasefire. Set perimeter security 360 degrees. Triage casualties at the aid station. I want a full sitrep in 10-inch. His orders restored a semblance of order, giving the shocked survivors a mission. But his own mission was different. He pushed past the sandbags of the command post entrance and began walking, his stride long and determined, directly towards the northern perimeter, towards the skeletal watchtower that loomed against the afternoon sky. A few junior officers tried to stop him. General, the area isn't secure. Sir, we need you in the TOC. He waved them off without breaking his stride. He knew the area was secure. The threat had been neutralized with an efficiency he had only witnessed a few times in his 40-year career. He needed to see the architect of that security for himself. The walk was a journey through the evidence of the battle. He passed the shredded HESCO barriers, the smoking craters from the mortar rounds, the discarded enemy weapons. And with every step, his respect grew. He was a student of warfare, and he was walking through a masterclass in defensive marksmanship. He saw the angles, the kill zones that had been established, the clear prioritization of targets. It was brilliant. It was art. He reached the base of the tower and began to climb the steel ladder, his boots ringing on the rungs. When he reached the top, the scene was one of surreal calm. Sergeant Elena Morgan was no longer behind her rifle. The M210 was already broken down, each component being wiped clean with a small, oil-soaked cloth before being placed back in its foam-lined case. Beside her, arranged in a neat, almost ceremonial row, was a small pile of spent 338 Lapua Magnum shell casings. She looked up as the general crested the ladder, her expression as placid as ever. There was no sign of adrenaline, no triumphant gleam in her eyes. She simply looked like a craftsman who had finished a difficult job. Sergeant, Madsen said, his voice quiet, filled with a reverence that transcended rank. Morgan rose to her feet, her movements fluid and economical. General, she acknowledged, her gaze steady. Madsen didn't ask her what had happened. He didn't need to. The evidence was all around them, written across the valley floor. He pulled out his secure satellite phone, the direct line to the highest levels of command. He punched in a code, then spoke with a quiet urgency. This is Madsen at FOB Nightingale. I need you to unseal service record Echo Lima 977. Authorization code Madsen Alpha 01. Read it back to me. Now, he held the phone to his ear, listening. The surviving defenders of the base had begun to gather at the bottom of the tower, drawn by the general's strange pilgrimage. They watched in confused silence. They saw the calm sergeant, the quiet woman Davies had mocked, standing face to face with the theater commander. It made no sense. The voice on the other end of the sat phone was tinny, but clear, a disembodied clerk reading from a file that few were clear to see. General Madsen listened, his eyes never leaving Morgan's face. He then held the phone away from his ear and activated its small, external speaker, turning the volume up so the soldiers below could hear. The voice from the speaker echoed in the stunned silence of the valley. Service record for Sergeant Elena Morgan. Primary MOS, Communications Specialist. Secondary MOS, 18X, Special Forces Candidate, reassigned. Current assignment, attached 75th Ranger Regiment S6. Previous assignments. There was a pause. Sir, the following assignments are Tier 1 classified under Directive 9-inch. Madsen's voice boomed across the compound. Bypass the directive. Read the unit designation, another short pause, then unit designation, Joint Special Operations Command, Task Force Orion. Operational Specialty, Special Mission Unit Sniper, call sign Apex 7. Combat Deploiement, 12. Classified, the crowd below stirred, a wave of murmurs rippling through them. Task Force Orion. It was a name spoken only in whispers, a unit of ghosts and legends who handled the nation's most secret and dangerous work. The voice from the phone continued, a staccato litany of impossible achievements. Notable qualifications: Master of Marksmanship, Long Range. High-angle engagement specialist, urban and austere environment dominance. Recipient of, the list of medals was breathtaking. A Distinguished Service Cross, 3 Silver Stars, 4 Bronze Stars with V4 Valor, multiple Purple Hearts. The citation for the DSC was read aloud, a dry, official account of a single sniper holding off a battalion-sized enemy force during a clandestine operation in a forgotten corner of the world, saving an entire Green Beret team from being annihilated. The story was eerily, terrifyingly familiar. The soldiers below looked from the tower to the valley, strewn with the bodies of their attackers, and then back to the small, quiet woman standing next to the general. The pieces clicked into place. The disbelief on their faces melted away, replaced by a profound, bottomless awe. They hadn't been saved by a miracle. They had been saved by a legend. Up on the platform, Morgan's face remained a mask of professional composure. This was a violation of her creed. Her work was meant to be silent, anonymous. Her value was in her invisibility. This public reveal was a kind of violence to her, but she accepted it with the same stoicism she accepted everything else. It was the cost of the day's work. General Madsen ended the call. He turned to face Sergeant Morgan fully. His back straightened. His hand, bearing the weight of 2 stars on its collar, snapped up to his brow in the slowest, most deliberate, most respectful salute he had ever rendered in his life. He did not salute her rank. He saluted her. He saluted the quiet competence, the silent lethality, the embodiment of a warrior ethos that transcended gender or size or the ignorant assumptions of lesser men. Sergeant Morgan, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. Your actions here today, they will not be forgotten below. One by one, the other soldiers, officers and enlisted alike, followed his lead. Hands rose to foreheads. A wave of silent, unified respect washed over the base, a tribute to the quiet professional who had stood alone on the wall and held back the tide. Just then, on the horizon, the dust trail of Captain Davies' returning company appeared, a column of shamefaced men returning to a battle that had been fought and won without them. The legend of the ghost of Nightingale was born in the stunned silence of that afternoon, but it spread like wildfire in the days that followed. It was whispered in chow lines, recounted in hushed tones in smoky barracks rooms, and typed into encrypted chat logs that connected bases across the globe. The story had all the elements of myth. The arrogant captain, The underestimated hero, the impossible odds, the stunning, undeniable victory. The raw numbers alone were the stuff of folklore. A battle damage assessment confirmed over 200 enemy killed in action, with dozens more wounded. And the forensic analysis was even more shocking. Nearly every single key enemy asset, the commanders, the machine gunners, the mortar teams, have been eliminated by a single precise shot from a 338 caliber rifle. One shooter had systematically dismantled an attacking force of 500. The story became a teaching point at sniper schools from Fort Bragg to Hereford. Instructors used the satellite imagery and after-action reports from the Battle of FOB Nightingale as the ultimate example of target prioritization and psychological warfare. They taught that the goal of a sniper wasn't just to kill, but to create chaos and paralysis, to make the enemy feel as if God himself was against them. And the avatar of that godlike power was a quiet comms Sergeant Nobody had seen coming. When Captain Davies and his company finally trudged back through the gates of the FOB, they were met not with cheers, but with the cold, accusatory stares of the soldiers who had stayed and fought. They walked through a landscape of their own failure. The air was still thick with the smell of death, a smell they had avoided while the real battle was being waged. Davies's face was a mask of gray, chalky shame. He had heard the whole story over the radio on the return trip. The general's call, the reading of Morgan's file, the salute. Every word had been a hammer blow to his ego. He was stripped bare, his arrogance and prejudice exposed as the pathetic, dangerous liabilities they were. The next morning, at the base-wide formation, General Madsen insisted that Davies make a full public report. Standing before the assembled survivors, Davies's voice, once so full of bluster, was a hoarse, broken whisper. He recounted his own actions, his dismissal of Morgan, his decision to leave the base undermanned. He didn't make excuses. He owned his failure completely. Then, he turned and faced Sergeant Morgan, who stood in the front rank. "Sergeant Morgan," he said, his voice cracking, "my arrogance nearly cost everyone here their lives. My assumptions were ignorant, unprofessional, and unforgivable. What you did, you saved us all. You saved me from myself. I'm not fit to lead these soldiers. I am not fit to wear this uniform." He then formally, in front of everyone, apologized to her and requested that General Madsen relieve him of his command. It was a stunning act of public humiliation, but also the first step on a long road to redemption. Morgan, for her part, accepted his apology with a simple, quiet nod. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction in his downfall. It was simply another problem that had been resolved. She deflected the endless praise and adulation that came her way with the same technical simplicity she applied to everything. When a young, awestruck lieutenant asked her how she managed to stay so calm under fire, she simply replied, "I control my breathing." The rest is just math. She took the two young specialists from her comms team, Riley and Grant, under her wing. They now looked at her with an undisguised reverence that bordered on worship. But she didn't teach them about shooting. She taught them about focus. She had them practice disassembling and reassembling their radios blindfolded until their hands knew the work on their own. She taught them to find the signal in the noise, to filter out the useless chatter, and focus only on the essential data. She was teaching them her true philosophy. Mastery isn't about being the best. It's about being so practiced, so disciplined, that your actions become an extension of your will, free from the interference of ego or fear. The legacy of that day solidified in ways both symbolic and deeply practical. The half-finished watchtower, the site of Morgan's legendary stand, was officially completed and dedicated within a week. A simple, hand-carved wooden sign was hung at its base, bearing two words, Morgan's Perch. It instantly became the most sacred ground on the entire base. No one went up there without a purpose. It was a place of quiet reflection, a monument not to violence, but to the profound power of quiet competence. The neat row of spent shell casings she had left on the platform was collected with the care of religious relics. General Madsen had them flown to his specialty workshop, where they were encased in a block of clear acrylic resin, arranged in the exact pattern she had left them. That block was mounted on a polished mahogany plaque and given the place of honor in the command post, right next to the American flag. The inscription was simple: FOB Nightingale. One stood against 500. Let actions, not words, be your measure. The story became part of the institutional fabric of the military in that region. For the female soldiers serving at Nightingale and the surrounding bases, the effect was transformative. They walked with a new confidence. The casual sexism and dismissive jokes that had once been a part of the daily background noise evaporated overnight. The men looked at them differently, not with suspicion or condescension, but with a newfound respect, wondering if another legend was hidden in their midst. Sergeant Morgan had not just saved a base. She had reset a culture. She had held up a mirror to an entire institution and forced it to see the difference between its cherished ideals and its flawed reality. Captain Davies was not dishonorably discharged. General Madsen, in a moment of wisdom, saw that a humbled Davies was more valuable as a lesson than a ruined one. He was reassigned to a training command back in the States, his career as a frontline officer over. His new job was to teach classes on leadership ethics and the dangers of prejudice to new lieutenants. He began every single class with the story of FOB Nightingale, using his own monumental failure as the primary case study. He became one of the most effective, if pained, instructors at the academy, his lectures a powerful testament to the lesson he had learned in the crucible of his own shame. And what of Morgan? She remained at FOB Nightingale for only a few more days, long enough to ensure the comms network was perfectly optimized and to file her after-action report, which was a model of clinical, emotionless detail. Then one night she was gone. A black, unmarked helicopter landed in the darkness and spirited her away, back into the classified world from which she had emerged. She left behind no personal effects, no forwarding address, only a legend. She was a ghost once more. Her purpose served. She had wanted no fame, no recognition. Her only reward was the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, of order restored, of competence validated in the only arena that mattered. The silence she left in her wake was as profound as the silence she had commanded during the battle, a testament to a woman who spoke loudest when she said nothing at all. Her presence lingered, a permanent part of the base's identity, a quiet reminder that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you notice the least. Years passed. The war in that region ground on, evolving and changing, but FOB Nightingale held. It grew from a temporary outpost into a hardened, permanent installation, a vital hub of operations. The tents were replaced with concrete buildings, the gravel paths paved into roads. But Morgan's perch remained untouched, a rustic steel monument standing guard over the modern base that had grown up around it. It was a landmark, a point of pilgrimage for every new soldier who arrived. The story of the battle was the first thing they learned, told to them by grizzled senior NCOs who had been there that day. It was no longer just a story. It was institutional folklore, a foundational myth that defined the ethos of the base. It was a parable about the dangers of assumption and the virtue of humility. The legend served as a powerful filter. The arrogant and the loudmouths didn't last long at Nightingale. The culture Morgan had inadvertently created was self-policing. Competence was the only currency. Results were the only metric. Everything else was just noise. A young, newly minted female lieutenant, fresh from West Point, stood at the base of the tower one evening, watching the sun set behind the rugged peaks. She had grown up hearing the stories of the ghost of Nightingale. Morgan was a figure as legendary to her generation as Audie Murphy or Sergeant York had been to generations past. The lieutenant had specifically requested this posting, wanted to serve at the place where one woman had proven that skill and courage knew no gender. She was here to live up to that legacy. She looked up at the platform, imagining the quiet sergeant holding back the tide of chaos, and felt a profound sense of purpose settle over her. Morgan's actions had not just saved lives on one day. They had forged a path for countless others who followed. She had kicked down a door not with a shout, but with the quiet, undeniable force of her own excellence. The legacy wasn't in the plaque or the name on the tower. It was in that young lieutenant, standing tall and confident, ready to prove her own worth. It was in the thousands of soldiers, men and women, who heard the story and were reminded that character is forged in silence, that respect is earned in the fire, and that true strength doesn't need to announce its own arrival. It was in the quiet professionals, the unnoticed and underestimated, who continued to do the hard, necessary work in the shadows, their only reward the knowledge that their actions mattered. They were all a part of Morgan's true legacy, a silent army of competence carrying the lesson of her actions forward into the future. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The base floodlights flickered on, casting long shadows that stretched from the base of the tower. The story of Elena Morgan had become more than just a memory. It had become a principle, a guiding star. It taught a simple, eternal truth that institutions often forget and individuals must constantly relearn, that the substance of a person is not found in their title, their volume, or the superficial judgments of others. It is found in the crucible of crisis. It is revealed when the noise fades and only the action remains. The world is full of loud voices demanding respect, clamoring for attention, and building thrones of ego on foundations of sand. But true authority, the kind that endures, is never demanded. It is conferred silently and willingly upon those who demonstrate their worth when it matters most. It is the quiet respect given to the master craftsman, the skilled surgeon, the steady pilot, the calm leader. It is the respect given to the sniper on the lonely perch who, through nothing but discipline and skill, becomes the immovable object against which the irresistible force of chaos breaks. Legacy is not a monument of stone or a name etched on a plaque. True legacy is a standard that inspires others to rise. It is a lesson that is absorbed into the bloodstream of a culture, changing it from within. Sergeant Morgan's legacy was not that she fired a rifle with impossible skill. It was that she proved, in the most dramatic fashion imaginable, that the content of one's character and the quality of one's work are the only things that truly matter. She vanished back into the shadows, but she left a beacon burning brightly in her place, a permanent illumination against the darkness of prejudice and arrogance. Her silence was her ultimate statement, a declaration that what you are speaks so loudly that the world has no need to hear what you say. The quiet professionals of the world continue their work, unseen and often unthanked, but they are the pillars that hold everything up. They seek no glory, but their competence is the bedrock of our security. They are the guardians on the wall, the steady hands in the storm, the calm voices in the chaos. They are the living embodiment of a creed that values deeds over words, and they're the heroes this world needs, now more than ever. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.